Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another. G'day, cobbers, and welcome back to another Megacam video. Guys, the upcoming class tuning changes for the War Within has just dropped, and these will go live in the next reset. So in this video today, we're going to go over what those changes are. We're going to take a look at the current meta, and we're going to try and predict how these changes are going to influence the meta coming up. So let's get into it. All right, so here we are with the changes. These changes are coming up in the next weekly maintenance, as mentioned, so that's only in a couple of days from this video dropping, and that's also with the opening of Mythic Plus and the Mythic Raid. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this affects the current PvP meta. So let's start off here. Death Knight changes. So having a look at these Death Knight changes here, most of these changes here are to Vampiric Strike and Sen Lane mainly. So I'm going to say these are probably mostly affecting your Blood DK in the game, and that's more a PvE thing, so let's skip past that. Demon Hunter fixed an issue that caused I-beams damage to be reduced beyond one target instead of 5. Fixed an issue that prevented I-beam damage from benefiting from isolated prey's damage bonus, and fixed an issue that prevented I-beam from benefiting from chaotic disposition's damage bonus. That is a big buff to Demon Hunter. If those were bugged all this time, this means I-beam's damage has been doing significantly less than it should have been, and Demon Hunter I-beam is going to be very, very deadly in PvP coming up now, so it's going to be a high priority for you to interrupt if you do have that ability. So yeah, that's really, really cool. Those fixes are pretty nuts. Balance Druid, all ability damage increased by 6%, Star Surge damage increased by 16%, Starfall damage increased by 20%, not applied to PvP combat. Elun's Chosen Lunar Calling increases Starfire's damage to its primary target by 80%, was 65%, the bonus remains at 50%. Okay, so these last two don't apply to PvP. So just having a look here, all ability damage increased by 6% and Star Surge damage increased by 16% itself. So combining those two multiplicatively, that's roughly about like a 17%, increase to Star Surge. That's really good. I do feel like they need to move things towards more casted stuff for casters and paying off the fact that you manage to play around and get cast off. However, the flip side of it is there's so many micro interrupts in the game, it makes it very hard for casters to cast, and it's why a lot of people gravitate towards builds in casters like Frost Mage and Affliction Waller currently, who are having to cast very minimalistically to be able to do a lot of strong damage. The Boomkin looks like it's making a little bit of a comeback here. Let's hope this is enough to bring them up a bit. Having a look at Feral's changes, so this one here, Blood Talons and Lion Strength no longer also increases the damage of Rampant Ferocity. I'd say this is like a quality of life change. Developers notes in response to the feedback that this change reduced the value of maintaining RIP and complicated using Blood Talons in AoE, reverting this change. Okay, so it looks like a bit of a quality of life change for doing AoE. All ability damage increased by 3%, RIP damage increased by 6%, Ferocious Bite damage increased by 3%, Feral Frenzy damage increased by 10%, Druid of the Claw Ravage damage increased by 3%. I'm hoping there is a balance of this in the PvP notes below, because Feral currently does do a lot of damage, and this is quite scary if these changes do go through. They're already a bit bursty, and their damage is quite nuts if they're played well enough. So this could be quite problematic if it does go through. Restoration, all healing increased by 8%, doesn't affect PvP. Rat damage increased by 20%, Starfire damage increased by 20%, and Star Surge damage increased by 20%. So none of this was really massively impactful in PvP. Maybe the rat, but it's very risky trying to cast rats to help execute someone down. So I'm going to say that's like more, that's definitely more a PvE adjustment. Evoker, disintegrate damage increased by 10%. Oh, okay, that's big. I'm hoping they balance that out, because Disintegrate already does a lot of damage. I'm pretty sure it's the highest. It does the most damage at the moment for Evoker over a whole battle or and whatnot. So that getting like another 10% on top of everything is nuts. Devastation, Eternity Surge damage increased by 10%. This is good. This is the type of change I want to see. I want to see damage being moved back into things that are being casted and away from things that are more instant cast or channeled, because there is a bit of like sometimes, like I think Disintegrate, there's times where it is uninterruptible, and in those situations, you know, you're just getting free damage off and whatnot, and they can also do it while they're moving. Mage, Living Bomb's explosion visually now only plays on the unit that is the Living Bomb rather than each unit damaged by its explosion. This is just a quality of life fix, I believe. Arcane, Sun Fury Meteorite damage reduced by 15%. Burden of Power damage bonus for Arcane Blast reduced by 20% was 30. Sun Fury, burden of power damage for Arcane Barrage reduced to 20% plus 30. So slight little nerf there to Arcane in PvP. However, I'm not sure. I don't think they run Sun Fury as Arcane. I think they're running Spell Slinger. So I don't think you're going to see much of that affecting much in PvP with Arcane. Fire, all ability damage increased by 6%. Living Bomb damage increased by 25%. So you don't really use that. But this one here, Fire's really struggling at the moment. So I don't think this is enough to really bring it back. So I'm really hoping there are some changes for down below that is going to bring them up a bit more. Fire is my personal favorite spec on Mage. However, I'm not good enough of a Mage to be able to make it work when it's not actually doing very well. So let's see if there's changes down below. Mistweaver, all healing increased by 3%. The next two don't affect PvP. So all you're getting here is a 3% healing increase. Windwalker, Darting Hurricane's passive trigger reduced by 50%. It now reduces the global cooldown by 0.25 seconds, was 0.5 seconds. So that's a very slight nerf there. I don't think it's going to have a huge influence. Windwalkers are quite nuts at the moment. I find they're very sticky, but they're also quite squishy if you can catch them off guard. Holy Paladin, all healing reduced by 6%, but that doesn't affect PvP. Judgment damage increased by 60%, Crusader Strike damage increased by 60%, Hammer of Wrath damage increased by 20%, Avenging Crusader transfer amount reduced to 260%, was 420, this doesn't really matter for PvP because we don't run that. Holy Prism single target damage increased 100%, area effect damage increased by 50%. Okay, let's talk about this. So, I like these changes. These two is what we need, and we need more of this. Holy Paladin used to be really, really fun when your judgments used to hit really, really hard. So not only were you able to heal, keep nice range, move in and out as you needed to as a Paladin, use all their tools to your advantage, you know, the whole preemptive play, cycling around your cooldowns, but you used to be able to burst pretty hard when you needed to, especially if someone was low enough that you could do judgment into a Hammer of Wrath. Those days have not been around for a while. From what I remember, that used to be the case in BFA. And it used to be really, really good. It felt very impactful. Not only as a Paladin were you able to do your normal healing roll, but you were able to throw in damage now and again. And you had the added benefit of doing solid damage to Judgment and not only maintaining Judgment on the target, just for those extra abilities that it gives you currently, or those extra conditions it gives you currently. Retribution, Herald of the Sun, Dawnlight damage reduced by 15%. This is kind of needed and warranted. Dawnlight damage is quite ridiculous at the moment. And I feel with Rep Paladin, it also, I want damage to move back into the buttons. I want the buttons to feel meaty when you hit them. There are a couple of buttons that do feel quite meaty at the moment that when you hit them. However, there are some abilities like Templar's Verdict or Final Verdict doesn't feel as good as it used to. It isn't really the big hard-hitting ability as it used to be. If you're playing Templar, you know, you're going for those Hammers of Light and they're your big chonkers. And with your Dawnlight, you know, your Dawnlight damage and maintaining those dots is generally your big hard-hitting abilities. Funnily enough, I think Templar Slash is the one that actually hits pretty much one of the hardest hitting abilities as a Herald of the Sun. So they need to move damage back into your holy power spenders like Final Verdict and make it feel good to hit again and not feel like it's a bit of damage, you're spending holy power and you're getting procs off it and whatnot. But it just needs to feel good. So this is a good change, and I'm hoping this changes to move the damage profile around a bit. Shadow, all damage increased by 6%. Psychic Link now affects 20% if its direct damage to targets affected by Vampiric Touch was 30%. So that's only like a slight nerf, probably more PvE thing. Damage increased by 6% is good. Rogues, all ability damage reduced by 4% for Outlaw. Dispatch damage reduced by 10%. Melee auto attack damage reduced by 8%. War Within Season 1's 2-set bonus now grants listed abilities a 35% chance to deal 30% increased damage as Shadow, was 20%. Oh, that's a big buff. War Within Season 1 4-set now for Between the Eyes increased to 15% damage per stack, up to 4 stacks, was 6% 3. So, okay, so if you stack this up, it goes to 15 times 4, that's 60% damage increase, as opposed to just an 18% damage increase before. That is huge. Rogues could be quite meaty once they get this for Outlaw. However, we need to see if this does change anything. I personally really love Outlaw. I've only ever played Combat / Outlaw as a Rogue. Rogue was my first class back in Vanilla. And I really want to pick up my rogue again when I get a chance, gear him up, and just exclusively play outlaw and get that to work in PvP and PvE. Enhancement, all ability damage increased by 4%. Witch Doctors and Sentry now reduces the cooldown of Feral Spirit by 1 second whenever you gain a Maelstrom weapon stack, was 2 seconds. So that's a bit of a nerf there to having their wolves up all the time. The War Within Season 1-2 set bonus now increases the damage of Storm Strike, Lava Lash, and Ice Strike, Crash Lightning by 10% with 6%. Okay, so a bit of a buff there overall to enhancement, which is good. They need that. They currently don't bring much to the table, and I think when enhancement's ever been good, generally it was good because all they did bring to the table was insane damage and insane burst whenever they would get procs, and also the randomized nature of getting a proc and bursting someone down with like Thorum's Invocation was really, really scary. Outside of that, they don't really bring anything. They have a bunch of utility, but it's never anything more than another class could do better. Restoration, Lava Burst damage increased by 12%, Lightning Bolt damage increased, Chain Lightning increased, mostly PvE help there. Warlock Demonology, Demon Bolt damage increased by 20%. Pact of the Eridruin Word, Summoned Doomguard damage increased by 45%. And Felguard damage increased by 15%. This is good. Demonology really struggling in PvP right now, and it needs a lot of changes. Well, damage increases, I believe. Destruction, all ability damage increased by 6%. Dimensional Rift damage increased by 40%, which we run in PvP. Channel Demon Fire damage increased by 40%, which we don't run in PvP. This is good. I personally love Destruction. I want to move back to it. I'm currently just playing Affliction because it's really fun and very strong. However, I do want to move back to Destruction. I have dabbled in it, and this is looking really good. So I'm hoping there's more changes. Warrior. Okay, Warrior needs changes. It needs nerfs. Colossus. Mountain of Muscle and Scars increased damage dealt by 5%, was 4%. Colossus damage dealt by Demolishes 2 initial strikes increased by 20%. Mountain Thane. Thunderblast, Lightning Strikes, and Ground Current damage increased by 6%. Okay, so those are all buffs to the 2 hero talents I'm not worried about. I think Slayer's the one that I actually really worry about, and that's what Fury runs, which Fury is currently ridiculous. Ridiculously disgusting in PvP. Arms, Bladestorm damage reduced by 10%. Fury, Bladestorm damage reduced by 10%. Yes. Odin's Fury damage reduced by 15%. I don't know if that's enough. They need a nerf Dragon's Roar. Is that what it's still called? But the equivalent of what that is now, that needs a nerf. Player vs. Player, here we go. Here's the player vs. Player changes. Death Knight, Frost Fever damage is no longer increased when PvP combat, was 25%. The icon for lesser anti-magic shells from Vestigial Shell has been updated to be distinct from regular anti-magic shell. Horseman's Aid effectiveness reduced by 50% PvP combat. Oh yes, thank you. So at the moment you have this issue where Death Knights, when they're running Riders of the Apocalypse as an Unholy, they can have a second anti-magic shell cast on them from their Riders of the Apocalypse, as well as using their own. Which means that for classes like Affliction, Warlock, Shadow Priest, you can't do nothing. You can't channel on them, you can't CC them, you can't cast dots on them. While that's up, you have to hit them with direct damage spells, and the shield is so meaty, it just takes a lot of effort to break down. So that's a good nerf. I think they need to do more about it, because currently I'm really struggling with against Frost DKs. Frost DKs and Unholy DKs, but Unholy DKs more than anything. Demon Hunter Havoc. The hunt damage and damage over time are now reduced by 15% in PvP combat, was 28%. I guess that moves some of their burst away from being able to do just the hunt in and then I-beam on top of that, so due to those I-beam changes, and just be able to burst someone down with ridiculously unhealable damage. Evoker, here we go. Disintegrate damage is no longer increased by 20%. Okay, so that means that's a 10% nerf overall to Disintegrate for PvP, as opposed to a 10% buff in PvE. Preservation, Living Flame healing reduced by 20% in PvP combat. Preservation healing was pretty nuts. I don't know if Living Flame was the cause of that though. Beast Mastery Hunter, another spec that is heavily underperforming in PvP. Kill Command damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. Cover Shot damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. Kill Shot damage increased by 40% in PvP combat. Barb Shot damage increased by 20% in PvP. Ooh, those are meaty changes. So Beast Mastery might make a comeback with this, which will be really good. Mist Weaver. Peace Weaver. PvP talent now reduces the cooldown revival by 30 seconds, was 60 seconds. Oh, so that's a nerf to revival. Oh, I like revival. I want to have UA on everyone and have them hit revival and then just get insta-gipped by all the backlash. But that seems to be, I'm sure there's a lot of Mistweaves out there that are not happy about that. Windwalker. Communion with the Wind damage increase is no longer reduced in PvP combat, was reduced by 50%. I don't know how much of an impact that is. I don't play Windwalker at the moment. Shadowpan. Wisdom of the Walls shadow damage is reduced by 50% in PvP combat, so that looks like a nerf. Holy Paladin. Sanctified Plates now increases armor by 20%, stamina by 10%, and area effect damage by reduction by 6% in PvP combat. Is that opposed to not doing that at all? Because if that is, that's a big buff. Divine Protection's damage reduction increased by 50% in PvP combat. So currently Divine Protection, or RET, only reduces our damage taken by 10%, because it's normally 20% in PvE, and then when PvP scaling comes in, it's 10%. So this change to Holy would bring it up to 20% again, or I think, or 30% again, from memory. Protection, Divine Protection for damage increased by 50%, so same thing here. That's pretty nuts. Where's the Ret change though? Ret's one is dog shit, and they're not changing it. That really sucks for Ret. Rogue, Subtlety, Reverberation damage bonus for Epic and Reprimand, reduced to 70% in PvP combat, base 100%. Good. They're already bursty enough. Shaman, Enhancement. Wow, okay. Here we go. Storm Strike damage increased by 20% in PvP combat. Wind Strike damage increased by 20% in PvP combat. Ice Strike damage increased by 40% in PvP combat. Frost Shock damage increased by 40% in PvP combat. Fire Nova damage increased by 40% in PvP combat. Lava Lash damage increased by 20% in PvP combat. That is looking insane. Enhancement Shamans are going to eat good with these changes.
You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
The problem with Enhancement Shaman is, this is what always happens. They just end up being known for their damage. And they're not known for anything beyond that. Their utility is dog shit compared to everyone else. Their stun, for example, is telegraphed, killable, and if you do get it off, it isn't really as good a payoff as anyone else's AoE stuns. So, apart from all the other utility they have, really this is all they're bringing to the table. Warlock, Affliction, Corruption damage reduced by 10% PvP combat. Shadowbolt damage reduced by 15% PvP combat. We expected this. Like Shadowbolt just hits like a truck, and it's instant cast when you get procs, which you get all the time. Unstable Affliction damage increased by 30% in PvP combat. Very good. This is what I'm talking about. Move the damage into the casted abilities. Unstable Affliction Backlash damage increased by 25%. Very, very good. So this is really good. This just incentivizes you to run the PvP talent that allows you to put Unstable Affliction on up to 3 people. This is really good. Hellcaller, with the damage reduced by 10% PvP combat. Okay, fair enough. So that's like a double nerf if you combine it with Corruption, I guess. Unless Wither had its own base and didn't rely on Corruption's base to influence its base, then it's just 10% nerf to both. Soul Harvester, Necrolite Teachings now increases the damage of Shadowbolt and Drain Soul by 10%, was 20%, so another nerf to Shadowbolt. So Shadowbolt's currently hit on average about 1 million, 1.1 million, sometimes I've gotten it to 1.5. This is going to roughly bring it down. If you combine the two of those together, it's 10% plus 15% reduction multiplicatively, around another 3 to 5% in there. So this is going to bring it down from down to like 800k to a million maximum, 700 to, so I'd probably say you'll see 700k Shadow Bolts up to 1 million maximum on hits now, which is a pretty insane nerf. Destruction, here we go. Chaos Bolt damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. Incinerate damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. Soulfire damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. Decimation now also reduces the cast time of Soulfire by 60% in PvP combat was 80%. I mean, this was already pretty fast anyway, so I don't think that will affect too much. Hellcaller, Wither damage reduced by 30% in PvP combat. I ran Diabolist anyway. Ruination damage increased by 15%. So Ruination actually hits quite hard. I think I've managed to get it to hit like 800 to 1 million, so the 15% is going to be very, very welcomed. It's actually a very fast cast too, so comboing that in when you get your Pit Lord up could be quite deadly. These are really good changes. This is what we need. I don't know how much I get Incinerates off in PvP though, but Chaos damage, Chaos Bolt damage and Soulfire damage is really good. Again, feeding into that idea of if you can get cast off, they should be deadly. Chaos Bolt does not hit anywhere near what it should be hitting. It is a very long cast. Even when you do use Conflag, it's very easily interruptible. You generally have to fake it out with Fear or an Incinerate or any one of your other spells. You want to try and get them to interrupt that and then free cast your Chaos Bolts, or juke them and then free cast your Chaos Bolts. But then again, you only get 1 or 2 off. So I want to see that hit for like 1.5 mil, 1.3 to 1.5 on average would be really, really nice, and make much more sense. So, okay, so these are the changes. Let's go have a look at the current meta. So the current meta, you have got, let's having a look at 1800 rating in Solo Shuffle. Currently you have, and if we're looking at just the DPS here, Melee Fury Warriors are just dominating and Unholy Death Knights are just dominating. Look at this, like the 50% of the player base is essentially playing this, who is Melee. And then you got Windwalker and Ret. Ret always has decent representation because it is quite easy to play. It's quite like good bang for buck. So you can really get into it PvP and actually perform quite well with Ret. So down the, and then like look at the rest of this, like Outlaw is completely not even played. And this is just looking at the 1800. Let's drop this to the 1500. Even looking at that, representation stays quite similar. You can see Ret and Windwalker has moved around. So with these changes in terms of melee itself, we should probably see Warrior start dropping down a couple of tiers and you allow some of the other specs to climb up a bit. I'd like to say Enhancement is definitely going to jump quite significantly after these changes, and Demon Hunter should also jump up quite high after these changes. I think hopefully the changes to Unholy generally in caster lobbies should influence Frost to be given more of a try. I think at the moment most Death Knights are just playing Unholy as opposed to Frost, and that's not that Frost is bad, it's just Unholy is better. And when that happens, generally everyone just gravitates towards that and ignores the other one. Looking at the range, let's have a look at what might change here. So Frost Mages surprisingly did not get touched at all, and they are the top, and they are ridiculous because they don't cast a single thing. They do ridiculous damage without casting, and they have not been touched, which is really bizarre, and I really hate that they have not been touched. They really do need to be nerfed. And move back to the philosophy of making them cast their abilities. Affliction Warlock over here, yes, we know that got nerfed, so I see that drop down, and I think Destruction's going to come up. Sorry, that's Fire. Destruction should come up a bit. Now that Affliction is going to fall off a little bit, because a lot of the damage is now going to move away from Shadow Bolt and going to rely on you actually casting, keeping your UA up especially, and casting those Malefic Raptures in between as well after your Soul Rots. So because that's going to happen, more chances to be interrupted, which makes it a lot harder to play. There's more chances people are going to gravitate away from that, and they're going to cast. They're like, I may as well play Destruction. I don't know if Evoker's going to get affected too much by these changes. Shadow Priest is pretty strong at the moment, got a 6% damage increase, so I'll probably see that move up a bit. I think Marksman Hunter is going to move only as a consequence of Beastmaster being buffed and people trying that, and if there is success with it, that moving up a bit more, and as well Balance Druid moving up. Demonology should move up theoretically, but I think Destruction is going to move up more than Demonology initially, just because the changes look a lot meatier. Arcane's going to stay down there. Fire changes, I didn't see any PvP fire changes, so sad face for all the fire players out there. I don't think that will be moving at all. In terms of healers, Holy Paladin should move up a little bit due to those changes. Resto Druid is probably going to stay where it is, and same with Mistweaver. But as for the other healers, I don't think much will change. I'd probably say Resto Shaman and potentially Prez might move down a little bit, but Holy Paladin I don't expect to take third spot more than anything with these changes, because no changes were made to Discipline either, which is also top ranking, which is also, like usual, being represented by the majority of the player base of healers, which is ridiculous. You can combine any two under here to equal the amount of disc players. Once again, guys, thank you very much for tuning into this video. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe down below, and I'll see you in the next video.